Those expecting Fire Emblem Engage to be a continuation of the brilliance of Fire Emblem, Three Houses will need to temper those hopes. Developed by Intelligent Systems and published by Nintendo, the game is at odds with much of what made Three Houses special. Instead, Fire Emblem Engage is a return to the series' roots in a way that feels like one step forward and two steps back, resulting in something that's still great, albeit in a more dated way. Fire Emblem Engage follows the story of Alir, a divine dragon who awakens from a 1,000-year slumber to find the continent of Elyos in dire straits. The threat of an evil force, the Fell Dragon, has begun to permeate every land's society, and the once idyllic peace that helped establish the amnesiac Alir is now crumbling. If this narrative seems generic, it is sometimes painful. For all the great world and character building that Three Houses demonstrated, Engage pretty much fails to bring it all to life. In fact, for the first 12 hours of the game, the story of Fire Emblem Engage is particularly difficult to take into account. It's nice to see characters returning from past games in the form of emblem rings, more on that later, but even their link chats are rarely more than a quick paragraph commenting only on war or friendship. The main cast are some of the most two-dimensional in recent memory, and too many early story beats try to play emotionally for characters who don't yet have names. It's especially frustrating because Fire Emblem Engage attempts to make these characters' stories and interactions a crucial part of off-battlefield gameplay. Somniel, the central city that characters can return to, is painfully boring, with half-baked systems that reward various items or unit experience, but feel like a chore to interact with. Gaining an edge in combat is necessary, so unfortunately it's pretty much a required part of the Engage experience, but luckily combat helps balance that to a large extent. Fire Emblem Engage is perhaps the best combination of combat elements in the series to date. The fight has become harder on average again. The Engage system mitigates this somewhat thanks to emblem rings, which can be traded with characters and give them access to a bonded status that combines their abilities with a hero from Fire Emblem lore. However, combat still requires extremely careful planning, with patience being a virtue for all but the most aggressive tactical setup. Fire Emblem also fight with an incredible variety of unit compositions, since the bond system in emblem rings allows their users to learn weapon classes they wouldn't naturally have access to. There are a ton of possibilities available to Alir. If players want an army of ranged combatants protected by a pair of heavyweights in massive armor, it's doable. If players want to take off and assemble a fleet of horse and Pegasus cavalry, that is also achievable. So much of the fun in Fire Emblem Engage is tied into the Engage and emblem ring system that it's also easy to forget that the combat is simply beautifully designed. The maps are varied, with missions having secondary options such as recruiting an allied unit in the field or evacuating villagers. The composition of the enemy army changes frequently and requires different methodologies to be defeated. The rock, paper, and scissors of yesteryear Fire Emblem games return here, still simple in theory but nuanced in practice. There really is no end to the greatness of Fire Emblem Engage combat. The problem is pretty much everything around it. Because as much as Engage's tactical prowess is a leap forward for the series as a whole, the rest feels like a few measured steps backwards. Aside from the wonky story, which certainly gets halfway better, the game doesn't look great, the music is forgettable, and almost all of the systems that aren't intrinsically tied to how much damage a unit deals on the battlefield are underdeveloped. That unique relationship, the extreme imbalance between a near-perfect combat system and a deeply flawed story and world, makes Fire Emblem Engage feel like it can't settle for what it wants to be. It should perhaps be seen as a template from which future Fire Emblem games can emulate combat, and a clear example of why even the best tactical RPG must still create a compelling framework to house its satisfying decision-making. Ultimately, Fire Emblem Engage is a great game that features one of the best tactical systems in recent memory, and for that reason, it's well worth a look. Don't expect to remember Elyos after the journey is over. Fire Emblem Engage will be released on January 20, 2023 for Nintendo Switch. A digital download code was provided to Screen Rant for this review. Our rating, 4 out of 5. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe and support my channel lesser than 3.